She looked at the old blue pickup truck sputtering into the parking lot of Cross Tower and laughed out loud, right in front of everyone. If you have ever been judged before you even opened your mouth, stay with me until the end, because what happens to that truck in the next 20 minutes will change how you see every person you have ever looked down on. And if this story moves you even a little, hit like and subscribe right now, because you are going to want to see where this journey takes us. The truck rattled to a stop beside a row of gleaming black sedans, and steam curled faintly from beneath its hood like it was gasping for breath after the long drive across the city. David Reyes stepped out, wiping his palms on his faded grey work jacket, glancing nervously at his watch. He was 38 years old, with tired hazel eyes that had seen more sleepless nights than he could count, a light stubble he never had time to shave clean, and hands rough from years of fixing machines that other men had given up on. His daughter, Mia, was waiting for him at home with a school project due in the morning, and he had promised her he would be back before dinner. He did not know that in the next hour, his entire life would tilt on its axis. Above him, behind a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass, stood Elena Cross, the CEO of Cross Dynamics, a woman who had built an empire out of sheer will and a refusal to ever be told no. She watched the truck pull in from her window on the 40th floor, and she let out a short, sharp laugh that surprised even her own assistant standing beside her. "Look at that," she said, gesturing toward the parking lot. "That relic looks like it belongs in a junkyard, not outside my building." Her assistant, a young man named Marcus, glanced down and shrugged awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh along or stay silent. "Whoever that is," Elena continued, "they clearly do not belong on today's shortlist." But David was not there by accident. He had been invited, along with 6 other independent engineers, to submit a final proposal for a $5 billion infrastructure contract, one that would decide the future of clean energy grids across 3 states. It was the kind of deal that made careers, the kind of deal that could turn a struggling single father's small workshop into a company that mattered. David had spent the last 4 years perfecting a technology that nobody believed in, a self-regulating power distribution system that could prevent citywide blackouts before they even began. He had built the first working prototype in his garage, using parts salvaged from that very pickup truck's old alternator, testing it late at night after Mia had gone to sleep, dreaming that one day someone powerful enough would finally listen. When he walked into the marble lobby of Cross Tower, the security guard barely looked up from his phone before waving him toward the elevator with a dismissive flick of his hand. David clutched a worn leather folder against his chest, the corners frayed from years of use, containing blueprints he had drawn and redrawn 100 times. Inside the elevator, he caught his own reflection in the polished steel doors, a tired man in a plain white t-shirt and denim jeans, boots scuffed from years of work, standing among executives in suits that cost more than his truck. For a moment doubt crept into his chest, tightening around his heart like a fist. He thought about turning around. He thought about Mia's face when he told her he had a chance at something bigger. He straightened his shoulders and stepped forward when the doors opened. The waiting room outside the boardroom was cold, all glass and steel, with 6 other engineers already seated, each of them representing multi-million-dollar firms with polished pitch decks and confident smiles. They glanced at David's folder, then at his boots, then at each other, and a few of them smirked without even trying to hide it. One man in a navy suit leaned over and asked, almost mockingly, "Did you drive that truck here yourself?" David simply nodded, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks, but he thought of his daughter's laughter, of her small hand gripping his at the school gate every morning, and the humiliation dissolved into quiet determination. When Elena Cross finally entered the boardroom, she carried herself like a queen surveying her court, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She had reviewed every proposal that morning except David's, dismissing his file with a single glance because the packaging looked cheap, the folder handwritten instead of digitally printed like the others. She began the meeting by praising the polished presentations of the larger firms, nodding approvingly at charts and graphs projected onto the massive screen behind her. When it was finally David's turn, she barely hid her impatience, glancing at her watch as if his very presence was wasting her time. "Go ahead," she said flatly. "Make it quick." David stood, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded his blueprints on the table, revealing intricate diagrams covered in handwritten notes and small technical corrections scribbled in the margins. He began to speak, and slowly the tremor in his voice steadied. He explained how his system could detect power surges 3 seconds before they happened, how it could reroute electricity across a grid in real time, preventing the kind of catastrophic blackout that had crippled the eastern seaboard 2 years earlier, an event that Elena Cross herself had lost nearly $200 million during, though she never spoke of it publicly. As he spoke, something shifted in the room. The other engineers stopped smirking. Elena's assistant leaned forward, eyes narrowing with sudden interest. But before David could finish, Elena raised a hand and cut him off, standing to gather her papers. "Interesting theory," she said coolly, "but this is a $5 billion deal, not a garage experiment. We need proven infrastructure, not a mechanic's fantasy." The room fell silent, and David felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, a sensation that had followed him his entire career, ever since he had dropped out of a prestigious engineering program to care for his newborn daughter after his wife passed away unexpectedly. He gathered his blueprints slowly, his jaw tight, refusing to let his eyes betray the storm building inside him. As the meeting adjourned and the other engineers filed out with satisfied smiles, already certain that one of their firms would win the contract, David walked back through the lobby toward the parking lot, his shoulders heavy with disappointment. He climbed into his old blue pickup truck, turned the key, and nothing happened. Just a dull click, followed by silence. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the dashboard, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on his chest. He tried again. Still nothing. Rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windshield like the city itself was mocking him. Inside the building, Elena Cross prepared to leave for a critical investor call, one that would determine whether Cross Dynamics could actually secure funding for the very contract she had just discussed. But as she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed violently, then again and again. Her chief financial officer's voice crackled through, panicked and breathless. The main power grid feeding the Eastern Data Campus had just failed, an unexpected surge cascading through the substations, threatening to wipe out the servers containing every piece of data for the investor presentation happening in exactly 40 minutes. Without that data, without those live financial projections, the entire $5 billion deal could collapse before it even began. Engineers scrambled through the building, technicians shouting into phones, trying desperately to reroute emergency power before the backup generators failed as well. Elena stood frozen in the lobby, watching her empire teeter on the edge of collapse, realizing with growing horror that none of the polished firms she had praised that morning had any real solution for an emergency unfolding in real time. It was Marcus, her assistant, who remembered the man with the folder, the one with the handwritten diagrams, the one who claimed his system could detect and reroute surges instantly. "He is still in the parking lot," Marcus said breathlessly. His truck would not start. Elena burst through the front doors into the pouring rain, her heels sinking slightly into the wet pavement, and found David still sitting in his lifeless truck, staring blankly through a windshield fogged with his own breath. She knocked sharply on his window, and when he rolled it down, confusion and disbelief crossed his face. "I need your system," she said, rain soaking through her tailored blazer, her voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "Right now, please." David hesitated only for a moment before grabbing his folder and following her back inside, his boots squeaking against the marble floor as they ran together toward the emergency control room. Around them, panic had turned to chaos, screens flickering with warning signals, engineers arguing over conflicting solutions, none of them addressing the actual root of the surge. David studied the schematics on the main screen for less than 30 seconds before his eyes lit up with sudden clarity. "Your secondary relay is compensating incorrectly," he said, moving toward the terminal with a confidence that silenced the room. "If you reroute through substation 4 instead of forcing it through the primary line, you can stabilize the surge before it reaches the servers." The head engineer scoffed, insisting it was too risky. that no untested theory should touch a live system during a crisis of this magnitude. But Elena, soaked and desperate, made a decision that would define the rest of her career. "Do it," she said firmly. "Let him try." David's hands moved quickly across the keyboard, his years of quiet, unrecognized experimentation in a garage finally meeting their moment of truth. He input the recalibration sequence he had spent 4 years perfecting, the same sequence he had tested 100 times on a smaller scale, using nothing but salvaged parts and sheer determination. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. The screens flickered violently, red warning lights pulsing like a heartbeat on the edge of failure. Then, slowly, the numbers began to stabilize. The surge that had threatened to collapse the entire data campus rerouted exactly as David had predicted, flowing safely through Substation 4, bypassing the failing primary line entirely. The screens turned from red to amber, then finally to a steady, reassuring green. A collective gasp of relief swept through the control room, followed by stunned silence as everyone turned to look at the man in the faded grey jacket who had just saved everything. The investor call proceeded exactly on schedule, the data intact, the presentation flawless, and the $5 billion deal secured within the hour. But something far more important had shifted in that room, something that no amount of money could measure. Elena Cross stood beside David as the crisis subsided, her earlier arrogance replaced by something raw and humbled. "I judged you the moment you drove in," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I looked at your truck and decided you did not belong here. I was wrong, and I am sorry." David looked at her for a long moment, thinking of every meeting he had walked into over the years, every door that had closed before he even had a chance to speak, every time he had been measured by his clothes instead of his mind. "It is not the first time," he said simply, "and it probably will not be the last. But my daughter taught me that the people who judge fastest usually understand the least." Elena nodded slowly, something shifting behind her eyes, a recognition of the countless times she had done exactly what she despised in others. In the weeks that followed, Cross Dynamics did not just award David the infrastructure contract, they made him a full partner, giving him the resources and the team he had spent years dreaming of. Engineers who once smirked at his boots, now working alongside him with genuine respect. His small garage workshop expanded into a proper research facility, and the very technology he had built from salvaged truck parts became the backbone of a new generation of power grids designed to prevent blackouts before they ever occurred. His pickup truck, the same one that had refused to start on the worst and best day of his life, was eventually restored and placed in the lobby of the new research building, a quiet reminder to every visitor that greatness rarely arrives wearing the clothes you expect. Mia, his daughter, grew up watching her father transform from an overlooked mechanic into a name spoken with respect across an entire industry. But what she remembered most was not the money or the title. It was the way he still came home every evening, still helped her with homework at the same worn kitchen table, still drove that same old truck on weekends just because he loved the way it reminded him of where he started. "Success," he told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset from their porch, "does not erase where you came from. It just gives you a bigger table to invite others to sit at." Elena Cross changed too, in ways that rippled far beyond that single rainy afternoon. She began personally reviewing every overlooked proposal that crossed her desk, refusing to let appearances dictate opportunity ever again. She often told the story in interviews, not to boast about the deals she had saved, but to remind young executives that the person they dismiss in the parking lot might be the very one who saves everything they have built. She kept a small photograph in her office, a faded picture of an old blue pickup truck parked outside her tower in the rain, a permanent reminder of the day she almost let $5 billion slip away because of a single, careless laugh. And somewhere in that quiet lesson lives a truth worth carrying with you long after this story ends. The world will often judge you by what you drive, what you wear, or where you come from. But true worth cannot be measured by appearances, only revealed through character, resilience, and the courage to keep showing up even when no one believes you belong in the room. If this story touched something in you, If it reminded you never to underestimate someone simply because of how they arrive, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, the next time you feel invisible, that your moment may be closer than you think.